Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast of The Robot Revolution. I'm your host, Mitch Tolson, and I am looking forward to today's conversation with Clayton Wood. Clayton is a seasoned veteran in the robotics space and former CEO of Picnic. I'm excited to talk to him about his journey in the robotic automation, the challenges and opportunities facing robotic startups today, and what the future holds. Clayton, welcome. It's great to have you join us.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Appreciate the opportunity.
So before we jump in, do you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Clayton Wood. I'm a Seattle-based entrepreneur. I've been doing startups for many years, following a career in aerospace, where I was at Honeywell for 12 years, ran the flight data recorder business there. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I've been doing startups in various industries since then. Aerospace, renewable energy, precision agriculture, and most recently, food automation.
That's awesome. I actually, when I in my prior role before joining and starting Ally Robotics, I was at a consulting company that worked with one of your prior companies, calculating the flight dynamics of pepperoni slices. So while we haven't met directly, some of my team members had worked with your team. So it's really great to now talk to you. Food automation industry is, I've been now involved in this space for several years now. It's, as you know, labor challenges are prevalent. It's an opportunity for some cultural changes and some opportunity for some automation to come in. So I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation, trying to tease out some of the insights that you have. Mm-hmm. So you've been in the robotics industry and just the industry for a while now. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced specifically within the robotics industry and then into the food services as well?
Yeah, so I got my start in robotics hands-on at my prior company, Unu, where we were using robotic cameras to image plants in greenhouses. And I think the first thing that you learn when you're building robotics is it's really a systems problem. And
yes,
it's regardless of how small or large the robot is, it's pretty complex and there's lots of different things that can go wrong. And so it's hard to be in a hurry to develop a robot to do a thing. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that's one. The other one is that almost every robotics application, at least the ones that I'm involved in startups, there's a customer adoption challenge also, because bringing the robot into whatever space you're bringing it into is probably something completely new to the customer, right, into the environment, into the process. And so there's a lot of change and change management that has to go along with the technology.
Speak just to dig in a little bit more there. What type of friction points have you seen with this kind of change management and adoption? Like, what resonates with potential customers? What are kind of detractors to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is they don't know what to expect. And I had this conversation with someone who was another automation exec a few months ago. And we were talking about if someone came to you and said, I've got this cool new invention. It's a household cleaning robot.
Yeah.
Do you want one? And you'd never heard of such a thing before. First thing you might ask is, well, does it clean the toilets and make the beds?
Right.
Well, no, it just does the floor. Well, I don't want that. That's not really house cleaning. That's just cleaning the floor. And that's the kind of conversation that I've had with restaurant owners bringing automation to pizza is they don't know whether to expect something that does everything or something that does one thing. There's just no benchmark. There's no prior art. They don't know how to wrap their head around it. And people look at it and say, I see what it's doing, but I can't really quite figure out how to use it.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of, so I was talking with a company owner who they were working in the automotive service industry, and they were approaching me of wanting this robot that would live within an auto parts store. A customer walk into the auto parts store, it would then, customer would like cue it to then follow that person out to their vehicle, help them with vehicle, diagnostics, and drive back into the store. And here's the parts you need to order to fix your vehicle. Mm-hmm. And the key thing they said to me was, well, it looks really easy because Star Wars does it. And it's like, oh man, like there's a gap there of how do we
Yeah,
educate these people, because science fiction makes it so easy, and yet
exactly.
if it rains, if it snows, if the parking curbs are all obstacles within this environment and problem space that they might not be thinking through of how complex that makes it.
No, you're exactly right. It's really magical thinking, and that's what I've seen with, especially, and it could be big brands, sophisticated customers, and their first reaction is to say, "Oh, if this is a robot, it must do everything. It must do end to
Yeah.
end. It must be like Star Trek. I push a button and it does everything just the way I want it." And they don't recognize the iterations and the generations of technology that have to be adopted to that. Or if you think about an automotive factory where it's all automated and lights out, how much investment has to go into the planning to build out that specific bespoke installation to
Yeah.
do that specific thing. And it's not a generalized case, and it's not interacting with the environment. It's just doing the same thing over and over again. And most of the real world applications don't do the same thing all over and over again. And that's where the complexity comes in.
Totally. They're not deterministic systems at all. So let's talk about pizza a little bit. The pizza industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Some sources say over 160 billion. Talk to me about the sub-market of pizza, food automation within pizza, and what's struggling, what's working well, how's the traction look like? What's your view on this?
Yeah, so pizza you've got it right. It's an enormous industry. It's global. And every pizza operator, everyone who makes pizza for a living and sells to the public has the same problem. It starts with labor shortage. There's a chronic labor shortage
Mm-hmm.
in food service, and that labor shortage means that you almost always have inexperienced workers making pizza. And one of the things that inexperienced workers do when they're making pizza is it's hard for them to have the skill to properly follow a recipe and make pizza in a hurry. And if you're in a rush and you're making pizza in a hurry, you're going to make bad pizza. You're going to waste
Yeah.
food. You're going to make inconsistent pizza. And so food waste and inconsistency are the top two pain points that everyone who makes pizza has the same pain points. So automation gives an opportunity to solve both of those problems. Um, and but when you think about, going back to the question, how is it going in the industry? Well, it's everybody has that problem. Everyone acknowledges that problem, but again, going back to
Change.
the adoption and the change
Yeah.
problem,
Yeah.
it's hard for people to wrap their head around what does the solution look like. And some of them want the solution that does everything. Some of them don't want a solution at all, or not one that takes up any space, or not one that requires them to change the way they make pizza, or not one that requires them to change their recipe at all.
Mm.
And so you're trying to work in an environment that's not set up to work that way. And it's everything from the food supply chain to the way the food is handled, cold chain and handling practices, packaging, worker training, how much space in the kitchen, how to
Mm.
adapt to real world environment. Lots of barriers.
Does that change the conversation a little bit between, let's say, the mom and pop pizza place versus the large, franchise, that operates across the U.S.?
It's it's this different conversation with every operator, and the beauty of the franchises is they do have processes and they do things their way, and I think there's a big opportunity to work with forward thinking franchises to adopt automation, and most of the big brands are actively considering it or working on
Mm.
some level of automation. So it's a pretty progressive thinking, I would say, but actually making that happen is long. It's a long haul with a big brand. You
Mm.
can make quicker progress with an individual progressive owner of one store or a few stores, but there's so much diversity in the pizza industry. I know, some people sell $5 pizzas, some people sell $50 pizzas,
Right.
and
Right.
the sizes are all over the place. The ingredients are all over the place. So it's not surprising that a lot of people who have gone into what you'd call pizza automation
Yeah.
are actually selling pizza. They're not even in the automation business. So my friend Benson Tsai in LA, Stellar Pizza, they get a lot of press because they're all from X Robotics. I'm sorry, all from SpaceX rather.
Yeah.
Um, and but they're in the pizza business. They're not competing with Picnic or anybody else in the automation business.
Interesting.
They're selling pizza, and
Right.
so their goal is to make the same pizza, make their brand of pizza all the time. Where Picnic
Interesting.
had a wholly different idea, which was we want to make the customer's pizza, make the customer's recipe, um, use the ingredients that they want to use, the recipe that they want to use, and so really solving a whole different problem.
That's interesting. I think about, for some of our viewers that might be an entrepreneur wanting to start up their own company, maybe it's in food automation, maybe not pizza, maybe it is, but where, trying to find those right first customers that you can kind of go deep and partner with.
Hmm.
Do you have any like insights or perspectives there on kind of the size of company these folks should go after?
Um, I think you know it. It's uh, it's interesting because I think that's right. I mean, it's classic technology adoption. You got to
Right.
find the innovators who are willing to experiment and really like the idea. Um, you got a dual challenge there. You can find an independent innovator who wants to work with you, and that could be successful. But you may not be solving a general problem. You may be solving his problem, and his kitchen is big enough, and his recipe is accommodating enough, and he's willing to change some things. Um, and he will work with it. So you can learn a certain amount about making your system work right.
Yeah.
But you haven't really solved do you have product market fit for the market? I don't think you solve it that way. If you work with a big brand, and there's a lot of big brands that are forward thinking, that are making progress, it's a long, slow road.
Mm.
And again, you have that expectation problem. And a lot of them, big brands have magical thinking as well. Big brands can think they want something that does everything for them or does it their way.
Right.
And I think in their perfect world, someone would just come to them and build something for them.
Mm.
And I've told them, yeah, there's engineering companies out there that do that, work for hire, but don't go to a product company and expect someone to build you a custom version of something.
Mm.
So there's a mismatch. And again, I think it all comes back to the fact that it's a completely new industry, food automation. And so there's no well-worn path. There's no obvious, oh, let's do it like those guys. There aren't any of those guys who are already
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So because it's totally new, people are trying lots of different approaches, and neither the customers nor the suppliers know exactly what the right answer is. So it's kind of a big experimentation
Sure.
uh, activity going on in slow motion, and everybody's doing their best. But finding a willing partner is really crucial to making progress.
You've developed a lot of insights here, like working through this. If you were to do it again, let's say you're, I don't know, make something up. You're some automation for ice cream, right? Like what would you do if you're starting a new company? Would you go for that small, kind of very flexible customer or the large kind of corporation or some mix in between?
I think it's really important to find a two two different kinds of support as a
Okay.
startup company. Startup
Okay.
companies are classically always resource constrained, always solving a
Yeah.
hard problem. I think you need customer partners who will work with you on your requirements to make sure you're solving the right problem and solving a problem that's in fact valuable, and that you can actually solve it in a way that's cost effective and space effective and price effective. Um, but you also need investor partners who are willing to support you. It's always going to be a capital intensive activity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cliche that hardware is hard. Well, automation is a really hard domain of hardware, and I would argue that food automation is a hard domain of automation. So you've kind of got the a really hard problem you're trying to solve, and it's complex and expensive to build one instance of a solution, and to iterate that,
Hmm.
working toward product market fit takes time and takes money, and you've got to have investors who are with you, who will stick it out and be with you for the long haul, because the opportunity is enormous. It's
Mm-hmm.
really
Mm-hmm.
as big as any other opportunity I've seen. It's global. It's really really lucrative, but you can't get there overnight, and you can't get there. There's no shortcut.
I think that's really great advice. From a technical side, what I try to do is coach teams on find that good partner who's willing to lean in, and then also from a technical architectural standpoint, have enough modularity flexibility into that architecture that the next hypothetical kind of next customers you can pivot to and support versus a complete redesign. But then that even is challenging in that, well, as you said, startups are cash resource constrained. That could be considered out of scope work. So you have to be very careful on what you do and you don't do. Which kind of leads me to my next question on you led Picnic from pre-prototype with no customers to now, deploy to multiple locations, partner with the large CM. Talk to me about that journey. Like what are kind of some of the key learnings and how is that overall experience? What insights do you have to share?
I think one of the insights is how many different identities the company has to take on during that journey. So when you start out, you need some insight about a real problem and make sure you're working on a problem that has meaning to a customer and there's a value proposition that someone's going to care about. And then you've got to have enough, clever design and innovation skills on your team to actually solve the problem, to make a device, and we'll just narrow it to automation, make a working system that actually accomplishes the solution to the problem, right?
Yeah.
And then, okay, so now you've got a working prototype. So that's kind of where I joined Picnic. There were working elements of the system that were already there, pre-existed when I got there, but it wasn't integrated. It had never been shown to a customer in that form, and we did that quickly, showed it to a customer. The customer was really excited about it, but what we had was something that was like an experiment. It was 80-20 framework, had no refrigeration. You had to hand feed each ingredient in. It was set on a tabletop. And so it wasn't suitable to go into a kitchen.
Correct.
So then the next task was, okay, how do we make this into something that can actually go into a kitchen, which meant it had to meet food safety requirements. It had to have refrigerated food storage. It had to be reasonably compact and not look like Frankenstein. But then one thing it's easy to overlook, you had to be able to build it.
Right.
So it wasn't just about an R&D project. You had to actually construct the thing. And in our case, we intended to build 4 instances of our first pilot version.
Okay.
We built one and it nearly killed everybody because it was so hard to build.
Wow. Design for manufacturing, so important.
But the same team that was really clever at developing the automation core mechanisms didn't have the experience of how to design for manufacturability.
Yeah.
Then you have a pilot, the customer likes it, it's got some things to fix. Well, now you've got to take that same thing and make it into something as actually a production product. Again, whole different skill set, whole different set of people.
That's right.
Or whole different set of capabilities. Maybe it's some of the same people, maybe it's some outsourced partners. But I think that's another, I'd say, for people entering the space, just a warning that the amount of work required to go from idea to working prototype is much smaller than the amount of work to go from working prototype to production ready.
Very sound advice.
It's easy to underestimate how hard it is to make something that is ready for mass production.
And so that effort takes capital. So
That's right.
We don't have the skill set. We need to hire people. And you leading the company, you're like, oh man, I gotta go raise. Talk about that.
It's easy in a startup environment to you've got all these different dynamics. You've got valuation and round size and investor enthusiasm and market size, and all those things result in you have a certain amount of available capital.
Yeah.
Well, that available capital may or may not match the work you've got to do. And so you can't make the mistake of scaling the work that you've got to do to the capital that's available.
Right.
You see people who raise hundreds of millions of dollars
and then burn out.
They think they've scaled up and they say, I've got to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And that actually has nothing to do with what your actual mission is, which is to build something that's ready to be produced.
That's excellent. So on the solution path, there's kind of, I look at it, there's kind of two, if we summarize a little bit, a path of creating a whole unique product that someone would build a facility around, or trying to design a set of products that solves a problem that kind of fits within existing environments, right? Using existing ovens and fryers and whatever it might be. Picnic chose the first path of creating a kind of independent solution. Why was that? And what are your kind of learnings and thinkings there and strategy?
I think that's a hard problem. Is which problem do you solve?
Yeah.
So the picnic solution is one that it's about assembling a pizza,
Mm-hmm.
putting on sauce, cheese, fresh sliced meats, other toppings. It's modular, configurable, and the idea was that those are the operations where the labor is. Those are the operations where the food waste happens. Those are the operations where the inconsistency happens. But of course, you build that, and the first thing someone says is, "Well, does it do the ingredient prep?" Well, no, it does. We built it to do A,
Right.
which is why doesn't it do B?
This is our scope. This is what we're delivering to for now. It's stage one. Yeah.
And the other challenge there is you've created a system that didn't exist before. It has no predecessor in the kitchen, except for a make table. A make table is much more versatile, can a lot more ingredients. And so the customers don't sit around with a pizza station sized hole in their kitchen waiting for this automation to arrive.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
regardless of how compact it is, regardless of how your kitchen's laid out, there's a middle adjustment. I've got to make room for this new thing in my kitchen. And there's one of your first points of adoption is, where do I put this?
Right.
And then how does it fit into my existing
Workflow.
production process?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it do everything that I need, or do I need to do other things in addition? Again, there's the whole series of those adoption adjustments that have to be made. And it's just like any other technology in any other industry. Using the technology has enormous advantages, but you can't take advantage of those opportunities if you're still doing things the way you did them before. You've got to adjust, and some people are ready to adjust and some people are not.
That's interesting. And so when you're working with these folks and they're planning their layout, there's also the planning of the cost modeling. Like, how are they going to afford this, pay for it? So my understanding is Picnic actually more leans towards a RAS-based model. Is that right? And
That's right. Yeah.
Talk to me about
the idea
that.
is that if you're in the pizza industry, pizza operators, it doesn't matter whether you're part of a global franchise or whether you're your own store, you're probably a small business owner. Small business owners don't typically have a big capital budget, and they certainly don't have the risk appetite of buying a piece of fancy technology that they don't understand. Those are huge barriers to purchase. So the idea of robotics as a service is that make it easy for the customer to buy. They pay for it out of their operating budget. They're paying a monthly fee, and in month to month, they're seeing savings in food waste. They're seeing savings in labor productivity. They're seeing savings in improved quality of the product. Hopefully, see boosted sales because they can improve their output per hour, and they can do faster fulfillment of orders. So they get all these economic benefits, and the economic benefits offset the cost. So the customer is cash flow positive from the first month. So that part of it works, and it's easy to buy, no money up front. The other part of it is, as the supplier, you've got to spend a lot of money to produce and deliver that system to the customer. So you've got to have a separate working capital arrangement on the backside where that's getting financed in parallel with the customer paying for it, so that as you're retiring the cost of the debt that you've incurred, it's it's being offset by the revenue. And then as that is resolved and the station is paid for, then you've got high margin recurring revenue. So it's a really good model. It works really well. And I think one of the challenges of working with innovative hardware, though, is a lot of the people who are out there in the business of providing working capital for equipment, it's a very mature industry. Most of them are accustomed to financing things like diesel generators.
Right.
And if you finance a diesel generator, then it's just you put it out into service, you're renting it out to different customers, and you don't mind if the lease runs forever or if you have to pay 25% of the cost to buy out of the lease after a few years,
Right.
or if you just let the leasing company take it and own it, and they could sell it on the secondary market. But if you have innovative technology, you don't really want uh, to create a secondary market in your technology.
Right.
You don't want to be
Right.
paying for it forever. So
Right.
you got to find the right partner that has the right structure, right financial structure that makes sense with your business, whatever your business is.
Do we lose you, Clayton? Oh, there you are. You're back. Okay, great. Thank you. That was really insightful. So the feedback to or insight to listeners would be, hey, RAS is a model that can lower the friction for adoption for customers, simplified model. But on the backside, the complexity lands on the company to figure out the financing and management of that.
That's
Is
right.
that okay? Great. So designing a solution is, as you said, one part of the effort, and then you also said it's significantly more work from a like how do you bring this to production and the productization of it. What type of learnings do you have from actually the deployment side? Now this thing is you're actually trying to bring it into the actual site, the field. Like you mentioned before a little bit of change management. What other type of learnings or challenges you faced, and what did you figure out in ways to overcome those?
I think one of them is um, I think it's hard to assess. I think you have to work really hard at assessing customer expectations,
Mm-hmm.
because customers can come and they can see a demo and they can say that looks really good, and then you know you have, again, it goes back to the technology adoption curve. Some customers are very accommodating of small variations, and early deployments of technology are always going to be, you're going to have little unforeseen challenges, and the right customer will work with you through that and be resilient for that.
Mm.
The wrong customer will want everything to be perfect
Right.
and will want to just sort of reject it because there's a paint spot or
Yeah.
something completely trivial. So having the right customers is really important. Um, and I would say you've got you because you don't. There's the problems you can anticipate from working in the lab, and then there's the challenges you're going to face in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
What are the real world conditions that you're going to see? And I think one of those, just talking about food automation specifically, one of the things we learned with the food supply chain. Food supply chain is nothing like a manufacturing supply chain. The founder of Chef Steps calls the kitchens horribly inefficient factories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're trying to produce the same set of products over and over again. It's high mix, low volume. But a kitchen doesn't resemble a factory in any other way other than the fact that it's trying to produce some consistent products. And so the supply chain for food is not set up at all to do that.
Right.
Chefs order one SKU from the suppliers. The suppliers send them whatever's on the shelf, and it's not the same thing. And the kitchen can be resilient to that, and they can work with that. We had a customer where they were, you find out how variable food is, and different foods can really change their properties. Cheese is a classic example. Cheese
Right.
changes its properties depending on how old it is,
Yeah.
what temperature it is, what's the humidity, how is it handled. And let's just say that if you take a big 50-pound bag of cheese and you put it on a loading dock on a hot summer day, and you
Ooh.
put some other bags of cheese on top of it, it's going to behave a little differently than if it just came fresh out of the factory and when had proper cold chain and got all the way into the walk-in without sitting in the sun.
Right.
But there's no process for making sure that happens because the restaurant can cope with that. They work through that. The automation has a harder time coping with that level of variation in the input.
That's really interesting. That reminds me a lot of when I was growing up, my family owned a grocery store, and we saw a lot of the similar type of things. We're out of this, or we're about to be out of it. We make an order, and it might show up one day or not. How do you
Right.
plan for that? And because you might have a sale about to come. Well, there's an expected volume consumption there, but if you don't have the volume to deliver on that, well, now you have to last minute change the sale. So
Exactly. So the environment that the automation is going to go into, we talked earlier about a factory that's like all set up specifically to do the same thing over and over again.
yeah,
And restaurants and the food suppliers and the workers and the processes, none of it is set up to do things the same way over and over again. So got to take into account all those. What's the environment that this automation is going to sit in? And again, it's kind of a cliche that you can't automate a process, just drop in a piece of automation into an existing process without changing the whole process. And part of that process is the environment, the kitchen operations, the workers, how are they trained, the food supply, just all those elements, taking full advantage of thinking about all that stuff before you think you're going to deploy rapidly.
that kind of brings up to me, if I've noticed in this industry as well, that expectations on equipment and automation are substantially different than other people. Like I've seen where maybe you're in a sandwich shop, and if an employee drops a piece of cheese or a slice of meat or whatever on the floor, they might at an opportune time, take off gloves, pick it up, throw it away, wash hands, whatever, get back to work. But if an automated system does that, your system's broken, it's failing, it's not working as intended. So how do you work through that type of, expectation management and challenge?
Exactly right. No, that's exactly what happens. Again, it goes back to the magical thinking that if it's automation, it must work perfectly, and it's like people with their cars. I had one customer analogized it to a car, and if I get my car, I expect to just go out and start it up and it goes.
And it just works. Yeah.
And that's true now.
Right.
If you've been around like I have, a few decades ago, that wasn't necessarily true. It
Pump
wasn't
the clutch.
unusual. Oh, my car wouldn't start today. Okay, well, that happens, right? When's the last time somebody's car didn't start? I mean, just
yeah.
Technology improves over time, and this is early technology. It's first of type, almost by definition. And so, if your customer just thinks everything's going to work, you're mistaken. First off,
right.
And so, as the supplier, you got to find the customers, help them understand, help manage expectations. And I'd say the general rule of thumb would be, go slow before you go fast. Get things figured out. Try to, don't assume that things are going to be smooth, because they won't be. So, go slow on the design, go slow on the deployment, go slow on the customer adoption, and get things worked out so that then you can accelerate. I think if you try to accelerate too quickly on any of those steps, you're very likely to lose time in the long run.
I've seen companies where they try to scale too quickly. Now they have a bunch of hardware units out there deployed, and now trying to service and fix an issue that's across all of those.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes incredibly costly, not just from a brand, but pure operational cost of driving to all these different locations.
It's really true. And so you've got to balance that. The deployment of robotics as a service equipment means you're servicing it, you're owning it,
right.
You've got to maintain it. And so a lot of that goes into, you got to design it up front to be no unplanned outages. An unplanned outage in a kitchen, if it happens during a service period, you could lose the whole service period. That's basically you're shutting down your customer's business.
Right.
So that's unacceptable. So you've got to plan for that before you get into their kitchen. How are you going to anticipate what might go wrong? How are you going to anticipate how they fix it? And it can't be, our service guy is only 15 minutes away. That
it doesn't work.
Someone and having them show up in 15 minutes and fix something in 15 minutes, you're still lost that service period.
That's right.
That's not good enough. It just can't. You either can't fail, or you got to be able to recover very, very quickly from anything that does fail.
That I've seen that, and especially in the fast food industry, I've seen where somebody's sitting in their vehicle in a drive-through, and if they don't get their French fries in 40 seconds, they're not happy. They're going to go somewhere else next time, right?
That's right.
And you can't call a service tech. Where factory automation, they might say, "Oh yeah, our SLA is 48 hours to come to your site and repair it."
That's right. Or we only built 100 cars today, but we can build 200 tomorrow and catch up. Right. You can't make more hamburgers the next day and catch up. It doesn't work that way.
So how about you as a founder? What is that thing that you're most proud of, that biggest challenge that you're most proud of that you overcome, and why?
I think what I'm really proud of is um, building a global brand that gained tremendous respect. You know,
Mm.
we rebranded the company. We launched it out of stealth. We created a product in a space that had no such product. Got recognition and endorsement and engagement from the largest brands in multiple verticals. And just as I'm leaving Picnic and was announcing my departure, you know, so many warm wishes from people
Mm.
in the industry, customers, competitors, just, you know, acknowledging that Picnic has a reputation of having done things right, both
Hmm.
from a design standpoint as well as from a business practice standpoint, and avoided a lot of mistakes in business approach and in ways of doing things. So I'm really proud of the brand that I built, and it's still going. And I'm still hopeful that they're going to continue to grow and dominate the pizza automation market.
That's amazing. I would even add on to say sometimes it's even more challenging and difficult to be a path breaker. And with Picnic doing what you guys have accomplished while you're there, is it's showing and proving to others, not just the market industry, but also technology developers of, oh, hey, there's a successful use case. Like, we could keep building off that, and here's a variant of that, et cetera. It's proving there's viability.
Exactly. In fact, you know, I have some opportunities to advise some startups in the space now, and they're not in pizza, but they're in food automation,
Okay.
and they're early enough that uh, they don't they still have a lot of road ahead of them. But just looking back and the benefit that companies starting today have, because there are multiple companies that have gone over the last few years and have shown the way, sometimes shown the way not to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, there's so many lessons to be learned as a fast follower versus a pioneer.
Hmm.
I know when I started at Picnic, basically the only so-called pizza robot company out there was Zoom. It never was really a pizza robot company, but it got that reputation of being a pizza robot company, and they made their own. You know, they plowed their own road and made their own choices, which are significantly different from what Picnic did. But everyone wanted to compare us to those guys, and what we were doing was really different, and
Hmm.
there was no example to follow, and we had to go in and find our own path.
So speaking on that, and for a lot of the listeners, I could imagine that they are facing the concept of not knowing what they don't know. And so in that vein, both what's something maybe that you didn't expect to be hard that turned out to be really hard, and then the converse is maybe something that you thought would be really hard but turned out to be actually relatively easy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think something that turned out to be hard that didn't anticipate was managing the external forces, the external environment. You know, we started off in an environment where it was a go-go period in financing. You know, like I say, just before I started, Zoom had raised $400 million from SoftBank, um, and there was a lot of sense in the VC market that, you know, going fast and getting big fast was really the right way to go.
Ah.
And obviously, over the last 2 years, the market has shifted significantly. And I think you have to look at what you're doing, but you also have to look at what the world is doing. And that turns out to be a hard transition to make, hard turn to make.
Hmm.
Um, the thing that I would say turned out not to be as hard is, I would say, building the team and building a successful culture. We really based it on some simple principles of transparency
Hmm.
and
I love
clarity,
that.
and um, just and sort of having the they talk about the no assholes rule.
Yeah,
We had a sign in the office that no jerks allowed, I think,
that's great.
and just hard experience of lots of companies. Um, Sort of having that pre-filter for, let's make
Hmm.
sure we don't have any toxic people in the
Hmm.
in the environment, and let's make sure and choose wisely, not only for capability but for personality, and find people who want to work on something fun,
Hmm.
and you take a really great team working on something that's really fun, like pizza robots. What's more fun
Yeah.
than pizza
No,
robots?
everyone likes
Um,
pizza, right?
and just manage with clarity and transparency. And we had a really good time, a really good team.
That's
Um,
incredible.
one of the best working experiences I've had in my career.
Something that deeply resonates with me, and that when I was back at Fresh Consulting, their kind of filter that it sticks with me. It was nice and smart. That's it. And it
Hmm.
was a great filter.
Yes.
You end up finding people that really care about doing the right thing, and they're passionate about it, and they're competent to deliver.
Hmm.
So if you had a time machine going back 5 years, knowing what you know today, what would you go change? What would you tell yourself?
Um, one of them, the theme we've touched on already. Don't underestimate how hard it is to get people to change, and how much bringing innovation to solving a hard problem
Mm.
is inherently change. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter how amazing the solution is, you're still asking people to change, and that's a hard thing. Don't underestimate that. Um, and then I would say the other one is really another one we touched on earlier. Work hard to find the right partners, customer
Mm.
partners and investor partners who will be there to help you solve both the adoption and product market fit fine tuning, as well as continue to support financially. Um, it's essential to have both of those things,
Mm.
and you can't succeed without it.
Mm. Is there something that throughout the last 5 year journey that you thought you needed that turned out that you didn't, and maybe you spent too much time on that? Time is precious, right? Like there's
Hmm.
something maybe
Hmm.
consumed too much of your time. It's like, oh man, wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I think there's always a risk of solving the problem beyond the problem, like trying to get too fancy too fast,
Ah,
and
interesting.
trying to make something that's more sophisticated than it needs to be.
Sure.
Um, and there's the analogy of the MVP for a
Hmm.
car is probably a bicycle. It's not a tire. And so it's easy to dig too big of a scoop with your technology backhoe, where you can't quite
Yep.
get it off the ground because you've really tried something too hard. Solve the simple problem first, and then
Mm.
iterate toward the more complex, and recognize which problems maybe aren't just you can't assume that every problem is solvable.
Hmm.
It's easy to have that technology arrogance when you have a bunch of really smart engineers, but make sure you're solving a solvable problem before
Hmm.
you take it on and make it core to your business.
I love that. That deeply resonates with me. I think in terms of the right scope at the right time, and
Hmm.
doing the right things, and I think by leaning into that model, it allows you to show your end customer the path you're on to get the feedback, so the
Hmm.
engineering team isn't inventing in a bubble, and then you
That's right.
create a product that nobody wanted. Like,
Exactly. And
yeah,
you can get people excited about something that's coming that never quite gets there, but the customer's waiting for it, so they're not buying it, and you're
right,
not delivering it because it's beyond your reach, and you can just sit there and tread water and not make progress.
yeah. So you've transitioned out of Picnic, and now you're providing executive advisory services. Talk to me about that. What are you up to now?
Yeah, I'm really at the moment really just dealing with a lot of inbound interest. I'm grateful for the uh, notoriety that I've gained in the industry over the
Hmm.
last 4 years, and so a lot of inbound interest. So I'm exploring different opportunities, some full time, a few advisory roles, with people in the industry, and perhaps a little bit of consulting, just
Okay.
seeing what comes, looking for the next thing that I can really sink my teeth into. I get excited about serious business challenges of delivering technology to solve a business challenge. I'm industry agnostic, even though I've built a lot of knowledge on food automation
Hmm.
space. I've done other industries. It's really the business challenge, which incorporates all those things, that gets me excited. Uh, the more complex, the better.
So if somebody were wanting to reach out to you and talk to you, have some conversations, learn from your insights more, how could they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn all the
Okay.
time. So just, reach out to me there. You can see what I've been up to. And I'm always interested in meeting people who have a specific need. I'm also interested just in connecting with people. One of my beliefs about networking is you never know exactly where it's going to lead. So
Right.
it's always interesting to talk to people and see who they know. And if I can be helpful to them, that usually returns some good karma that pays off in
Mm.
the long run.
That's awesome. I'd imagine a lot of folks might reach out from a standpoint of, hey, I'm doing this startup. It's high risk. I don't want to fail. So maybe what can you share from that aspect of how can you avoid failure? What are maybe you saw some robot companies maybe you didn't expect to fail and did, and like what are kind of your insights there?
Well, I think the first insight, I think there's a market driven insight at the moment, which is be as capital efficient as possible,
Hmm.
and always assume you don't know where your next funding round is going to come from.
Right, right.
It's easy to do that today because there's not too many funding rounds that are happening. But I think it's staying conservative, go slow before you go fast, solve simple problems before you solve harder problems, manage the scope properly. I think those, and if you do that and you've got the right market input from customer advice and the right financial support, you can mitigate a lot of those things. I think a lot of mistakes get made through arrogance,
Hmm.
assuming someone knows what the market is. They're going to go build something super fancy, and turns out the market doesn't really want that super fancy thing. And that's a fatal error in automation development because there's just not enough capital to make big mistakes and
Hmm.
recover from them.
Hmm.
So I think that's the number one at the moment. And seek out advice of people who've been there before. And that's the advantage now. There are some people out there who've been there before where it wasn't true before, but the need is really big. The customers are more receptive than ever of automation solutions, and I think it's really growing, and it's going to transform everything.
That's great advice. So if kind of building on that, let's say there's somebody that they're just completed their masters and they're trying to figure out, do I keep going in education or I got this idea, I invented something, I want to create a company. What would you tell that particular potential entrepreneur, and to help get them down the right path?
Um, yeah, I never like to discourage people from finishing their education, but there's a real limit to how much you can learn in school to help you do this stuff. I think the super sophisticated knowledge through education will make you a really valuable individual contributor in an entrepreneurial company. It's not going to teach you much about how to be an entrepreneur or how to run a company, and so it sort of depends on what you want to do. I think there are opportunities to be an individual contributor and to grow a career in startups by being really good at a narrow field of expertise. But I think there's no substitute for just experiencing startup life because there's so many lessons you learn day to day. What we call it high ambiguity environment,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I would say this is specifically for people who are in technical fields, engineers in general. I'll generalize as an engineer who had learned this myself. Engineers don't like ambiguity as a rule.
Right.
They like things to be deterministic and black and
Yes.
white,
Yes.
and startups are the last thing. They're the furthest thing from
That's right.
deterministic and black and white.
That's right.
everything everything depends. Everything's a gray area.
Yeah.
There are just mistakes to be made everywhere. There's no formula you can solve for. So I think just living in that environment and seeing if that's for you.
Mhm.
Can you tolerate a high ambiguity environment? If you can't, then you might want to look at something that's not a startup or a narrow piece of a startup that piece of it is solvable.
I love that. And I've also seen where some new entrepreneurs, they might face analysis paralysis, as they say, right? They need all the data because they invented the tech and they have that mindset. But it's sometimes you have to make a decision without all the data set and
Yeah.
take that risk, right?
In a startup, you never have all the data.
Right. That's
And
right.
you don't have all the data, you don't have all the customers, you don't have all the money, you don't
So
have all the resources.
where do you see the market going in the next 5 years? What are you excited about?
I'm excited. What I've seen in specifically in food automation, when I started, people were still talking about robots stealing jobs. I think we've gotten
Ooh,
over, we've put that myth to death, to rest, because there are so many open food service jobs. There's twice as
yeah,
many as there were 4 years ago,
yeah,
and it's not going away. And automation doesn't have to replace jobs. It changes and improves jobs, doesn't replace them.
right.
Um, and so that stigma is gone. The stigma of automation, everyone is, it's conventional wisdom that you need automation, you need technology. And what's still unsolved is what technology do you need and which
And where?
technologies are going to actually help.
Yeah,
But I think that's coming. More and more players in the market, and I think there's going to be more and more breakthroughs. I think there's not going to be a single breakthrough. It's going to be a lot of smaller
incremental.
companies doing different things, and then they're going to build on each other.
Mhm.
But it's definitely very much a coming thing. The adoption rate is only going to accelerate in the coming years.
Love that. What a great discussion. And, I heard a lot of different things from you, and hopefully our listeners did too. One of the things I've captured as an overall theme is I'm hearing just think critically about the business, not just the product. It's when are you spending your cash? How are you spending that? It's finding the right customers to adopt, planning for those kind of unexpected events. And as you said, going slow first to iterate and figure out what exactly you need to create before you start scaling are all pretty important. At least those resonated with me. Do you have any other final thoughts that you might want to share?
I'll just underscore what you said. I look at startup life as there's lots of core things you need, and it's easy to get focused on your product,
Hmm.
or to get focused on how big your market is, or how cool your technology is, and all those things are important, but none of them are important in isolation. So it's really an integrated activity of putting those things together to solve a problem that people want solved and are willing to pay for. And to me, that's the fascinating thing about startup life, is really that system effect of all those elements working in concert effectively to
Hmm.
actually add value.
I would second that. I've also seen too, if there's a lot of folks that are coming from larger companies and organizations where maybe they didn't have so much broad ownership, and startup life can actually give you a lot more perspective on how to bring together an entire system. So if you are looking for more ownership and you're coming from one of these large companies, maybe startup life you could try it out. You might learn a
There,
few things.
there's nothing like it for getting a clear view of the whole picture.
What it takes.
You
Yeah.
just can't do that in a big company.
Yeah. Well, Clayton, thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed our conversation, and for the audience, stay tuned for next time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mitch. It's great to be here.
Thank you.